It's week 2 of your grade 10 lockdown lessons, and this week we'll be starting with a new unit of work. Hi grade 10s, how are you doing? Are you surviving the lockdown? Remember, if you need to get hold of me for any reason at all, you can do so via Edmodo, WhatsApp, Zoom or email. And yes, I'm still missing you. As you know, this week we return to our drama study with Shakespeare's Macbeth, picking it up from Act 2. Before you get settled, make sure that you have your textbook at hand, along with a variety of coloured pens for annotation, as well as your Macbeth notebook. It's also advisable to have access to digital theatre. If you can access digital theatre, here's a reminder of how to go about it. You all use the same username and password. If you're unable to sign in, or if you have a sketchy internet connection, please don't panic. You can try to find other YouTube clips of various movie versions of the play. And if that fails, before you write your final exams, I'll host a screening of the entire play in my classroom. And yes, popcorn will be allowed. So, what are we doing today, Monday, 20 April? I've divided today's lesson into 2 parts. The first 20 to 30 minutes will be spent recapping Act 1 and the work we have already covered in class. Please remember that you're in a group for a specific theme. You should continue to collect information about your theme in preparation for the end-of-year essay assessment. The remainder of the lesson will be spent on Act 2, Scene 1, the famous dagger scene. As I go over the content of Act 1 with you, please remember to jot down any information or thoughts pertaining to theme. Focus on your theme, but don't ignore the others. The pictures on this slide show some of the symbols and concepts that can be used to further understand the various themes, and we'll come back to symbols at a later stage. Let's recap what we already know. The next few slides will contain summaries of Act 1. If you are unsure of any content, I suggest that you pause the video and go over that section of work in your notebook. This slide is a reminder of who's who in the Macbeth Zoo. We've already met the 3 witches, the Weird Sisters, King Duncan, his sons Malcolm and Donalbain, and of course we've met Macbeth and his good friend and comrade in arms, Banquo. And we've started to get to know the formidable and frankly scary Lady Macbeth. In true Shakespearean fashion, we do not meet the main character in the first scene. Instead, we meet 3 witches who chant their way through this scene in rhyming couplets. They're planning to meet Macbeth. That can't be a good thing, can it? By the way, do you know that in traditional theatre circles it's considered extremely bad luck to mention this play by its title? Superstitious actors refer to it as the Scottish play instead. It's the second scene of the play, and Shakespeare still keeps the title character away from us. What we do see is the just and noble King Duncan. A battle is raging, and we learn that one of the best soldiers on the battlefield is Macbeth. A wounded captain informs King Duncan of Macbeth's incredible feats in battle, and Duncan responds by referring to Macbeth as his valiant cousin, a worthy gentleman. By now you know that this is dramatically ironic. Ross enters and tells Duncan that a Scottish nobleman, the Thane of Cawdor, has betrayed the king, and that it was Macbeth who defeated the Thane of Cawdor in battle. Ross calls this Thane of Cawdor a most disloyal traitor, which obviously is another example of dramatic irony. Duncan is so pleased that he tells Ross to find Macbeth and give him the title Thane of Cawdor. At last, we get to meet Macbeth. The setting is the heath where the witches are. You'll remember that in the opening scene, the witches chanted, "Fair is foul and foul is fair." It's therefore significant that the first words uttered by Macbeth echo those of the witches. Macbeth says to his friend Banquo, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." This immediately aligns him with these weird sisters and their strange world. The witches greet Macbeth with 3 titles. The first one, when they say, "Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis," will not be a surprise, as this is Macbeth's current title. But when they say, "Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor," this must surely confuse Macbeth, because he believes that the Thane of Cawdor is still alive, awaiting punishment for betraying King Duncan. Finally, the witches say, "All hail Macbeth that shalt be king hereafter." I'm sure that the Elizabethan audience would have gasped at this. As you know, they believed in the divine right of kings, so this would have sounded sacrilegious to them. I find Banquo's response very interesting. Banquo says to Macbeth, "Why do you start and seem to fear things that sound so fair?" Could it be that Macbeth has secret ambitions, which the witches already know about? The witches don't ignore Banquo. They tell him that he is lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy, yet much happier, and "thou shalt get kings, though thou be none." Can you imagine the reaction of Macbeth and Banquo when shortly afterwards Ross and Angus arrive with the news that the king has conferred the title Thane of Cawdor on Macbeth? For the remainder of scene 3, we can see Macbeth's mind working overtime as he thinks about the possibilities of power that appear to lie ahead of him. In scene 4, we return to Duncan's castle. We learn that the old Thane of Cawdor has been executed, and Duncan tells everyone to gather round as he has a very special announcement to make. He wants to name his successor. I'm sure that Macbeth's first thought was, "Gosh, these witches got it right." So he must have been both shocked and bitterly disappointed when Duncan named his eldest son Malcolm as his heir. At the end of the scene, Macbeth admits to us in an aside that "this is a step on which I must fall down, or else o'erleap, for in my way it lies." His true colors are starting to show. Scene 5 is very disturbing. It's here that we meet Lady Macbeth and discover her to be the opposite of a demure and submissive wife. She seems just as ambitious as her husband, and she's overjoyed when she receives a letter from Macbeth saying that King Duncan is on his way to their castle in Inverness. She delivers a wacky speech in which she asks evil spirits to unsex her so that she can lose any hint of softness and femininity. A fourth witch, anyone? Lady Macbeth seems to be the dominant partner in this marriage. She tells Macbeth to look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it. And when she says, "He's that coming," obviously she means Duncan, "must be provided for," I get chills down my spine. She is one determined and manipulative lady. Duncan arrives at Macbeth's castle in Inverness. He comes across as a really sweet, kind, and trusting man. He greets Lady Macbeth as our honoured hostess, clearly another example of dramatic irony. The tension is building, and the audience will be wondering just how the Macbeths are going to pull off their planned murder of the king. The final scene of Act 1 is a very important one. It opens with one of Macbeth's famous soliloquies, where he expresses doubts about the plot to murder his king. He acknowledges that Duncan is in his castle in double trust. First as his kinsman, that means that they must be related, and second as his subject. Macbeth is a well-trained Scottish soldier. He will have sworn allegiance to his king. Of course, this is the cue for Lady Macbeth to exhibit her utter contempt for any sign of weakness in her husband. When Macbeth asks if we should fail, she counters with, "We fail? But screw your courage to the sticking place, and we'll not fail." She has it all planned. When Duncan is asleep, she'll drug his guards so that she and Macbeth will be able to enter the bedroom, kill Duncan, and beat a hasty retreat. Macbeth is super impressed with his wife and doesn't seem to mind that she's calling all the shots. He admiringly says to her, "Wow, bring forth men children only." His contribution to the murder plot is that he'll use the daggers of the guards to kill Duncan and then smear the blood on them to make them look guilty. And so the stage is set for the assassination of the rightful King of Scotland. As an educated Elizabethan theatre-goer, you know that all hell will break loose if the Macbeths go ahead with their plan. You know that God appointed kings. So to kill a king, that's called regicide, by the way, is an unforgivable sin. And to disrupt the chain of being, you do remember what that is, don't you? Must result in absolute chaos. What a way for Act 1 to end. Are you ready for Act 2? Act 2, Scene 1 is short. There are two distinct events in this scene. Firstly, there's a brief conversation between Macbeth and Banquo about the witch's prophecies. Secondly, Macbeth delivers the famous dagger soliloquy when he imagines the murder weapon floating in the air above him. It seems that everything is coming to a head. When you read the first part of this scene on page 55 in your textbook, pay attention to the language, the diction. There are references to light and darkness, sleep and dreams. The atmosphere is palpably sinister, as it appears that evil is enveloping Inverness. On page 57 in the dagger soliloquy, take note of the references to blood, sleep, the possibility of witchcraft, and take especial note of the structure of the last 3 lines. The rhythm should remind you of previous speeches. Did you spot these quotes when you read this scene? Banquo says to his son Fleance, "The moon is down, there's husbandry in heaven, their candles are all out." That's 3 times that he mentions that the night is darker than usual. To Macbeth, Banquo says, "A heavy summons lies like lead upon me." "What, sir, not yet at rest? I dreamt last night of the 3 weird sisters." Clearly both men are troubled and are unable to sleep well. The next slide is a real treat. There is a film clip of one of the greatest Shakespearean actors of our time, Patrick Stewart, delivering the dagger speech. Enjoy a masterclass in acting.
Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand. Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision sensible to feeling, as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? I see thee yet. Thou marshallest me the way that I was going, and such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, or worth all the rest. I see thee still, and on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood that was not so before. There's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. Now, o'er the one-half world, nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtain's sleep. Now witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder, alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf, whose howls his watch, thus with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing stride towards his design, moves like a ghost. Thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps which way they walk, for fear thy very stones prate of my whereabouts, and take the present horror from the time which now suits with it. Whilst I threat, he lives. Words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. I go, and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for 'tis a knell that summons thee to heaven. Or to hell.
Wow, I hope the drama students are as inspired as I am. Now, having watched this famous speech, what do you think? Is Macbeth going crazy? Is he a victim of witchcraft? In other words, do you think he's losing control over his own fate? Or is this just proof that his ambition is out of control? A final thought. If you were the director of the play, or a film version of the play, would you make the dagger visible to the audience? Why? Jot down your responses in your notebook. You're going to work closely with the text for the rest of this lesson. I expect you to annotate the soliloquy in your textbook, so please turn to page 56. If you like, you can write responses in your notebook as well. I'd like you to complete 7 activities with the dagger soliloquy. You have the text of the speech in front of you in your textbook. Firstly, annotate the text to show how Macbeth's perception of the dagger changes through this speech. Secondly, consider the word fatal. It has more than one meaning here. What are those meanings? Thirdly, why are there so many rhetorical questions? What is their effect? The fourth task concerns the section of the speech that you see on the slide. What changes here in terms of content and style? I have highlighted some words in red as a clue. Number 5. There are references to Hecate, she's the goddess of witchcraft, and to Tarquin. He was an awful Roman king who was hosted by the beautiful Lucrece. In the middle of the night, King Tarquin raped his hostess. She was so traumatized that she committed suicide. Why do you think Shakespeare used such dark, depressing imagery here? Number 6 is easy. Find all the examples of personification that you can on this slide. Underline them in your book. What do they tell us about Macbeth's mental state? The last task, number 7, is just a reminder to look out for the many occasions that sounds are mentioned in the play. The ringing of bells in particular is very significant. Before you started this scene, I asked you to pay attention to the last 3 lines. They have a particular rhythm which is emphasized by the concluding rhyming couplet. Who else spoke like that? You're right, the witches. It seems that evil will soon be let loose over Scotland, doesn't it? We're done. Act 2, Scene 1, check. If you have any queries, grade 10s, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'll see you again next lesson. Goodbye.